Hello, everyone. My name is Dana Thomas. I am a speech language pathologist and I live in Orange Beach, Alabama. This afternoon, I have the great pleasure of being your host for the Point Quest webinar series. I'm so glad you're here. But before we dive in, I'd like to introduce a few key people who help make these sessions possible. First, meet Ricardo Peñate, our technical wizard behind the scenes. Ricardo will be managing today's tech and making sure everything runs smoothly. After the session, he'll also follow up with information regarding your CEU credits. If you experience any technical issues, please reach out to him directly in the chat. And now I'm honored to introduce our featured speakers, Melissa Crosby and Kim Lohner, two exceptional professionals with decades of combined experience supporting students and educators. So first, Melissa Crosby. She has over 25 years in Texas public education. She began as a classroom teacher with 8 of her 9 years focused on special education, working with students from kindergarten through 12th grade across a range of settings. For the past 16 years, she's held leadership roles, including 11 years as principal of Fields Store Elementary, and most recently leading the successful launch of McReevy Elementary. Melissa holds both a bachelor's and a master's degree from Texas A&M and is currently a doctoral candidate in educational leadership at Texas Tech. Her research centers on using professional development to improve student outcomes, which reflects her deep commitment to equity and educator empowerment. And now Kim Lohner. She brings a rich background in psychology and education with more than 15 years of experience. She holds a BS in psychology from the University of Houston Clear Lake and a Master's of Education in Educational Leadership from UT Arlington. Kim started as a cognitive therapist in a traumatic brain injury clinic before moving on to education. She taught for 7 years in a self-contained classroom for students with autism and also serves as an inclusive practices educator. Today, she's the educator partnership and placement manager at Point Quest Group, where she connects passionate professionals with opportunities to fill school vacancies and support students in our helping community. So together, Melissa and Kim bring invaluable insights into special education, inclusive practices, and leadership development, perfectly aligned with Point Quest's mission to support every student with compassion and care. So please help me in welcoming Melissa and Kim, and the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much. You should see the presentation pop up. So Kim, can you confirm that you see that for me when you do?
Yes.
Welcome, everybody. It is so great to see you all here virtually this evening. It's evening for me. I'm at home. We're a couple hours, I think, behind many of you, 6 p.m. here. So we are excited to be a partnering team. We've been able to be partners in our educational professional worlds in other ways, both in public schools. And so we're excited to talk to you today and see how we do presenting together as we talk about leading together and how administrators and educational support professionals and specialists can support success. So we'll just begin clicking through here and seeing if we can share some valuable information with you this evening. I am adjusting to my home setup and it is definitely an adjustment for me. So I apologize. So we are from Texas, lots of years in Texas public schools, and we recognize that in Texas, we do have our own lingo. So we started out with sharing with you that we are in the Houston area.
That can go.
And we use terms like ARD is going to be an IEP meeting. We talk about structured classrooms, so we let you know those acronyms there. Related services would be ancillary services when we talk about things. Inclusive practices, we want you to know that those are general education students and classes with supports. A couple other program terms there, and we use y'all, and that's everyone in the webinar. So we want to make sure that we invite you to that term and make sure you feel included. Kim, do you want to talk to them about that a little bit?
So, to help with engagement tonight, we thought that it would be a fun activity to have you tally how many times we say y'all. And this kind of comes just from being in a district, or well, actually on a campus where we had a friend of ours who was Canadian and she had distinct words that she would use. And, sometimes I would giggle and just kind of tally how many times she would say those distinct words. So, we thought this would possibly help with engagement tonight. So, whoever at the end gets closest to the tally of how many times we say y'all, you will be emailed a gift card to get yourself a coffee. Maybe I know back to school time starting now, so you can get that coffee to help you back on that first day of school.
And Ricardo is our baseline. He's in charge of the control number. So we really don't know how many times we'll say it. And so first, I'd like to share with y'all this photo here. This is Kim and I when she was in the teaching role and I was in the principal role on a campus together with another inclusive practices teacher. She might get mentioned throughout here because she was part of developing some of these collaborative practices that we are sharing tonight. So this is us not at the very beginning of our journey together, but it definitely is quite a few years ago at a McTeacher night, actually. So it was a good time. So our goal for the webinar tonight or this evening is to empower y'all to improve partnerships between principals and teachers for improved student outcomes. So with that goal in mind, we want to commit to you that we are going to share student tracking tools. We will share strategic thinking guidance and have a call to action. So these three things will be throughout the presentation. As I start talking to you, I share this slide, and this is a slide that often for me pops back up when I'm talking to my staff or when I'm presenting, and really kind of on any topic through coursework or professional organizations in our state. And these are words that drive me, that describe me, that I really associate strongly with as a leader in education right now. I'm in that doctoral program, so I'm really focused on my intellectual leadership. I want to be a disruptor. The status quo isn't good for me. So we're often piloting new programs. I found I can use that word a lot in my district and be able to try new things. And so I encourage each of you that center yourself around who you are as a leader or who you are leading others to be. Find out what their mission is for them as a leader. And these tools should support your mission. And if you have that well defined and you're centered there, it will help you figure out how to use these tools and how to have them make an impact in your own leadership or in guiding others. So thinking about those words and developing the leadership in campus administrators, I will be talking to you about what I feel is important, and that's the impact. So when I'm making an impact as an educational leader, I think about what we've done. What have we as a campus or as a group done to move education in the right direction for students? That's the real goal, right? We want those bright and wonderful future outcomes for our students post-secondary. So everything that we're doing, whether we're anywhere K through 12, is what have we done to impact student futures? What are we doing? So what have we done and grown and evolved to the practice that we're doing now? And then where are we going? What's in the future? What's our short-term goal, our long-term goal? Do we have a strategic plan to guide us to where we want to be 5 or 10 years from now? What's that graduation goal potentially? So when we're thinking about impact, we're always thinking about all three of these things. And for me, that really leads me to this, and it's that leaders make things happen, but leadership is developing systems that keep them happening. So I started out as a principal and I was just trying to make things happen. I was like, hey, we got to move this needle. We got to make this project happen. We need to improve this service. We need to add a community night for parents. But what I realized is that leadership, that real practice, is creating systems that will keep them happening. So what did we do? What did we turn it into? And where do we want this to go? So if I establish a specific kind of community night, and that's part of the culture of my campus, I need to put that somewhere into the systems that the next leader will be able to come in and have that same community night and keep that feel for our families. And so when we apply that to the practices in special education, because it is part of your campus culture, traditions, and practices, these are things that we share as tools so that when I come in as a leader, I can build those connections and understand and know my students. And part of this is that leadership of being able to pass the torch to another principal when they come in, or to be able to train assistant principals. I worked as the principal at the one campus for 11 years. And In that time, I had 4 different assistant principals, 2 that were promoted into principalship positions, 5 different assistant principals, 2 that were promoted into principalship positions from that. So I'm always working to grow them into their next position. And so as we talk about these tools, we'll be thinking about creating systems and utilizing them. So this is what I call it. We called it Texas Best Elementary School, but it's my ARD responsibility teacher list. And this is something that I develop as an administrator in partnership with typically my department chair or lead special education teacher. And so on this document, you're going to see a lot of different details. And what I want to talk to you about is a student, and I'm going to call him John. John came to me at my new campus last year in 3rd grade. So I received him as a student in a structured classroom. And y'all, I'm telling you, he was amazing, smiling, bright. He can navigate the building. Yet we were kind of walking him around because he was in a structured unit for students with intellectual disabilities. And so we started backing off of these things. I said, I don't care what his paperwork says. He's very capable. So let's start transitioning him. So we started finding ways could be far more included than what we realized. And at the same time, we started digging into his background. I did not have a document like this provided to me, forwarded on to me. We, in scrambling to get our new building open literally days before the school year started, I had not settled in enough to develop and make this document for my student. So in that dig, in the fall semester, I would say probably mid to late September, we found out that John had been tested in kindergarten and labeled with a label that actually said, this may not be a fitting label. He's previously been served in special education. Students should be monitored and reevaluated. That was like someone punched me in the gut and took all the air out of me. This was in kindergarten, and this baby is now sitting in 3rd grade. And so over the course of learning who John was as a learner, talking to his parents, learning about his history, what we found out is he had had at least 3 different administrators, and from kindergarten to 3rd grade had remained in a structured classroom and definitely not been in a least restrictive environment. And I am very passionate about the fact that now we've got to have a plan for this kid to build success. So we really started focusing on growing skills in him, and an individualized plan that wasn't even special ed. It was just, what all can we pack into his day to grow some skills and see his reading level develop, and is he going to blossom and bloom? And we think that he had some tendencies that were labeled as autistic. He had some speech issues, and really once he kind of gained some skills, probably some maturity in there too, just happening. And John was really very capable. So what I wish would have happened is that there had been this ability to have, this John is labeled under 5th grade, but have a document such as this that would have helped communicate some of those nuances that may or may not be spelled out if you pull out the last IEP. Because what happened is this kid in the FIE had this comment. They had the ARD meeting. That ARD meeting rubber stamped him to be where he was, and he was kind of just stuck on that treadmill. And that is why I am where I am, is I do not want kids to be stuck on a path and be defined by a label early on. I am very passionate about planning for transitions and moving them and inclusion. So with this particular kiddo, I do want to share with you that we went in it like eyes wide open. We owned the fact that the kiddo had made academic gains, but maybe not progressed at a rate that he could have. So we layered in those things. We presented the plan to the parent. And so one of my things to just encourage you is, if you make a mistake in special ed, because mistakes will be made, we have lots of kids, it's just to own that and come up with a plan that serves kids in the best way. And because you're developing relationships and you are using systems to get to know your kids, I have seen positive outcomes from those things. And that story, and kind of sharing a little bit about him in a random moment with Kim and another individual, is kind of how this webinar idea came to fruition. So when we look at this particular template, you'll see that we have the programs of CANS, Reset, Sales. So y'all can see that those are highlighted in different colors. And I use those colors when I shade in the box where the student name is to help me find the kiddos that are in those programs. When you look at the date over in the highlight that's bright green, that particular date is like the last day that this document was revised, and the initials of who revised it, because If I have a question, I want to be able to quickly, I know I can go search in the history, but I like things to be pretty visual and at my fingertips. And you'll see that throughout all of this and with colorful and color coding and those things. So that date and those initials help me know who had their fingertips in it last. So then when we look at John, we put his name there and he has his student ID. In Texas, I have had 2 Jose Garcias in maybe even in the same grade level in some schools. So we want to make sure we have their student ID. You'll see the column for teachers. So in my 3rd grade rotation, they have 3 teachers. They go to math, they go to language arts, and they go to science. So if this kiddo is homeroomed in Miss McCandles's class, that's highlighted yellow, then I'm going to just invite Miss McCandles to that ARD because that's an appropriate teacher for him. But if you look down below that first one, where it's a green box with no student name, we also have Miss McCandles. And then below that, you'll see the cyan, bright blue color, and the yellow. So if it's highlighted yellow, that might be their homeroom teacher, but maybe homeroom is math. And this kiddo really is struggling with science for some reason. Maybe it's the social interaction. That's who I want to be at the ARD primarily. And this communicates to my diagnostician to help support who gets invited to the ARD meeting, because in our meetings, we only have to have the one required general education teacher. We love it. And when the teachers say, can we all come? I say, all of y'all are certainly welcome. But we have to have that one teacher to meet that criteria. So that coding helps in that area to really key in if we need a specific content teacher there as preferred. If you look under special education ARD responsibility teacher, that could be your case manager would be another way to put that. And so these are my special education teachers. So if you look for John Wayne, E. Edwards is his responsibility teacher. That's the person who's gathering up all his documents. That's his special education teacher that would sit in his ARD meeting. Then when you look over across to the next column, you'll see the qualifications and supplemental needs. So in that column, this is where I can say they're SLD, they have a significant learning disability, they have speech services, other health impairment, they might have occupational therapy. I'm using all of our great Texas acronyms and jargon, and I'm sure everybody has their own. But notice that little star in that note there. This column is for notes of any kind. So for John, I put that monitor for dismissal because that note would be another place to quickly tell an administrator, a case manager, that this kiddo is on the brink of really just joining into that general ed curriculum, which is the goal and where we want them to be. If that's the appropriate setting. So we want to keep monitoring that and doing it. In this column, I might also put something specific about a translator. I might say that it's Mandarin or it's Farsi or it's Spanish. I might put a note there that this kid was virtual academy last year. I might put a note that this kid came from homeschool. I might put a note on there that this kid has a very nervous mom, or maybe the mom has a close relationship with a particular person on my campus. So I know if we're going into something that might be an area where she has questions, she has a trusted person to ask those questions of. So in that qualifications and supplemental needs, for me, supplemental needs can kind of be any little note that I want to put in there. And then special transportation for field trips. If you've ever had to plan field trips for students, getting special education transportation correct is a huge deal, and it's lots of money, right? Because you're paying the same amount for one kiddo to go on a bus just about as 75 in our state on another bus. So we want to make sure that we plan for those allocations correctly when we're budgeting in the school year prior, and then spending that money if it's need to be spent to keep that bus there. So it gets its own column because it's super important in the campus operations side of things. So if you go below that first table box, you'll see that in 5th grade, I have 4 special education teachers. I can look at my counts for Miss Edward, Miss Marlowe, and Kidd, and they each have 1, 2, and 1. I have an even distribution for my caseload. These are things that I need my eyes on as a principal to make sure that I'm balancing things for my teachers correctly and not overloading anybody. There's a note there that explains the translator need and that's noted. If dyslexia is noted, who is the dyslexia teacher? We've now moved dyslexia fully under special ed, so it would be a dyslexia diag, but who delivers that service? So we would reword this a little bit here. And then below that is where I have my total teacher counts. So I really divide out. I have Miss Edwards with inclusive practices. I might have another inclusive practices teacher, so there's an empty spot there. If Miss Edwards has 1 kid and the other person has 0, they have 1 total. I'm looking at program balance always. How many do I have in all of my areas? Where's my staff? These are pieces for me as a principal that I use for management and to support my teachers. So if my CANS teacher calls me and she's crying, she's like, I'm super overloaded, I have a place where I can go look really quickly and see her total number. And then I also have to see the needs of those kiddos. But it's been important to me as a principal to have these counts. So then when I take this document, I have fifth grade, I copy that table, I make it for fourth grade, third grade, second grade, and I go backwards all the way to kindergarten as we add students. I might have pre-K or an ECSE program also. That's our early childhood program in the state of Texas. So this piece would be below pre-K or my lowest grade in my campus. And so it would be one long running document with multiple tables. And this is my watch list. So if I have a kid who might be entering into special ed, we're looking at them, we're doing some assessment, I'm going to go ahead and put their information here because I also can see the impact to my caseloads for my teachers. And then if I have a kiddo, say John up there and that I had in fifth grade, he got dismissed. So I would copy John Wayne, or I would cut him from that table and I would move him down to the table below because I still want to monitor him. So for me, this would say to the next principal, hey, he's dismissed. We don't have a monitoring system for following up after we say back into the general population. And so this is the system that I developed and worked for me as a principal, and to just kind of keep track of them. And like I said, also be able to pass it on to a next leader if there was a leadership change. So, and I know I keep like looking, I'm doing dual screen work here, so I apologize for that. So here is where Kim will talk to you about a teacher contribution.
Okay, so y'all, so this is one of my favorite tools that I used as a special educator because it's kind of what I consider Spark Notes. It's the Cliff Notes version because sometimes, it's overwhelming to read through the PLAF and the IEPs and even like their evaluation. You have to read a functional behavior and all that. So this kind of gives me the Cliff Notes version. And then it's something that I can also in turn attach and share with my gen ed teachers. And then we also like to share with our administrators. Now, Melissa will share in a minute what she likes to do, but this has been originally what we had used in the past as an administrator and teacher combo to kind of give her an idea where she could quickly reference key parts of the student or about the student. So you can see up here, we have the student's name, John Wayne, and we put in their ID number, grade level, case manager, all the common things that they would have, guardian information, and then their need to know information. Again, this is Cliff Notes, so we have the main things that we like to look for. And on a need to know, like a behavior intervention plan is very important to notice. And if they need special ed transportation, the field trip, again, it's on here. The good thing about that is when you hand it to the gen ed teacher, it's easy access because a lot of times the team leader is the one that's having to send in, like, this is how many buses we need. And they get asked, do you need that sped bus? And if the case manager isn't accessible in the moment when they have to answer that question, this document's here to tell them as well. Modify curriculum, and then you'll see the EB, which means emergent bilingual. So in this instance, John Wayne is Spanish, and he's Spanish based on the home language survey that gets filled out when students first enroll in school. So we made sure to put that on there. And then this is the part where you could just kind of type in what are individualized things that they may need. So we know that he needs recess support, the classroom accommodations. Over here, I have a check mark that just says if they also need that for testing. So you don't have to recreate the wheel. Services. I like to put down student strengths that I've heard in the art because that's also a good thing to give to the gen ed teachers. Sometimes it becomes overwhelming when they see, oh my goodness, I have a special ed kid. What am I going to do with them? Are they going to be so low that they can't do certain things? But having those strengths kind of build them up and seeing what they can do to adapt for that child. And another thing that I felt was very important that I learned throughout my years was making sure I had a way to easily document ES-wide, because you always get asked in every meeting, even if you have a staffing or an ARD, do you see that they're having regression or recoupment issues? So Of course, John Wayne is not. So I just put a check no, and then I'll normally circle like after which big break they might have had it and how long it took them to get it back. And then the notes part is just kind of things that I put down that I think are important and valuable to me. So the notes is always left blank for like the administrator or the gen ed teacher because they might have different notes that they find valuable to themselves. So another thing just to point out that we find important is we talked about translators. Well, oftentimes with the home language survey, a parent has checked that they have a dual language, but there are those times that that parent really doesn't need the translator. And so if we highlight the name, then that means, yes, we need to indicate that there's a translator needed for this art. If it's not highlighted, then we know that the parent has now said, we've been doing this for 3 to 4 years. I don't really need that person sitting next to me. I am perfectly comfortable with proceeding without that. But if it's highlighted, we know. And we also base the highlight off of the language of the interpreter that they may need. Because, like, for instance, we had a Spanish interpreter, but we don't necessarily have like a Mandarin interpreter on our campus. So we would know ahead of time we need to go through the steps of getting one through our higher admin at SPED because they have a program that they go through to get those people. And then another thing that we like to indicate, and you can use any shape that you want or any color or symbol, is this red star. So this is going to indicate to me that John has some kind of medical need. And it'll also indicate to anybody else, instead of putting all that on this report so that it's out there for everybody, we used a system called Skyward. When I was in the classroom, I could access John Wayne and it would tell me what his medical issue was or concerns. It may have told me that he takes medication 2 times a day or at lunchtime. It lets me know if I need more clarification, I can go ask the nurse. So it's just different little keys and symbols that you can use to make this more efficient for yourself.
So a lot of this with talking about our student tracking tools, it's really trying to take large quantities of paper and information, screens to scroll through, and boil it down at whatever level you need to support you. So there's different layers in here. You could use them all. You could pick and choose. I've used the IEP summary as a note-taking document as an administrator just to like keep my own focus in the meeting. And I've made binders of them. And so if I've kept it myself, then I've compared with my special ed teacher at the end to make sure we all heard the same thing. I use it as a check off for those deliberations to make sure we covered everything that was important. And I've kept them, like I said, old school in a big binder, and I could flip through all the meetings I had with those kiddos. As we become more electronic, I currently use an e-tablet, and I have an organizational tool where I can list the kids and the date and the type of meeting, and I can toggle to that specific meeting. It jumps me to a note page, and I'm using a note page template, but in my mind, visually, I organize it about like this because I've practiced a template like this so many times. So every kid in the top left, it's going to have certain information. In the bottom right, it's going to have certain information. I mean, that's just helpful to me to be able to access that quick and ready resource rather than having to go into our online program and try to find the right ARD, the archived ARD. Maybe we've just had the ARD and it's not even available and archived yet. And so some of y'all may know what we're talking about in going through this frustration, but it can definitely be an in-depth process to find information. So these are tools that we have used over time and changed and evolved with and used in different pieces to have that ready. So the next thing that I wanted to talk to y'all about is decision-making anchors for strategic thinking. So take a look at my pictures that are going to pop up, and there's some interesting characters here, and I'll talk to you about each of them. So first, we'll talk about those 3 questions that should guide the decisions you're making in special education. And in Texas, they're the ARD assurances, the promises that you make at the end of the meeting to the families to have that kiddo in the least restrictive environment, to have them engaged in extracurricular activities, and then also to have them with their non-disabled peers. So when you utilize those 3 questions to guide everything that you're doing decision-making wise, it's just important. If it's important in an ARD to make sure that you're following those things, it's just as important in the small decisions that you make during the day. So I always guide leaders that I'm mentoring to use those ARD assurances and think of them as guiding principles throughout all of your decision-making processes, because sometimes as leaders, it's exhausting and you're making hundreds of decisions in a day. So then moving down underneath that, there are 4 guides. And so these are my silly photos here. I answer myself personally to four main things. And so I answer to like a spiritual yes, like, is this the best decision for a spiritual yes? And I'll give you an example in just a moment. My next bullet there is legal. So I visualize the white wig on a Supreme Court justice. Could I stand before federal courts and say, I can justify this decision in this way? And so I kind of think of like, is it legally sound? Is it reasonable that sometimes in special ed, you're having to think of the intent of the action. You're having to think of not just what the word said in the legal jargon, but what is the intent that has been interpreted and determined from that. And then if you go to the next bullet down, I think about my employer or my school board in Texas. They are the ones who run our school districts. So the gentleman in glasses at the top left, his name is Mr. Kaminsky, and he was the school board president when I became a teacher in Waller ISD, and quickly became an administrator. And during a lot of my administrative time in Waller, he was the school board president. So he's who I like visually picture. Can I look him in the eye and say, this is why I made this decision for the student, and it was in their best interest? And then my fourth guiding principle or guide is my mom. And that's the picture there from our shopping day in Navasota, Texas. I just thought it was fun to share her and just say that these decisions that we make are really personal. And so using these three questions and these four guides, to me, is important when you have a kiddo who's having a crisis in your front foyer. And this is where the example comes in of running through these things. I'm not necessarily supposed to pick up a 5-year-old and carry them into my office. But if I'm in the front foyer and there's parents about to come in the building or a class passing by for PE, what is the least restrictive thing that I can do to this kiddo? I'm not going to drag them across the floor through the door to get them into a private space. I'm going to grab them, like pick them up and, guide them, like one of those kind of like you lift them up off the floor and you're like, come on, walk with me, sweetie. Let's get to my office and we can talk about what's upsetting you. So we're going to do that. And my thing is I can justify like helping this kiddo get out of that situation because I want to protect their humility. I don't want other parents to judge that child or that situation. I don't want to negatively impact their student, their peer relationships with other students. So I'm always thinking about what would my mom want for me as her kiddo if I was having this crisis moment, or if I was needing to make a decision about how many math problems I hold myself accountable for. It's really kind of all of those decisions need to be processed in some way. And so for me, sharing that I use the 3 questions and the 4 guides is a way to maybe get you to think about what things can you run through your mind quickly to say, am I making this right decision? Because I've seen the face of many assistant principals when they just look like a deer in headlights. Because y'all, they don't know what to do. They're like, this kid's sitting here crying and they're rolling on the floor. I'm not supposed to pick them up. I'm not supposed to do this. And all they can think about is what they're not supposed to do. And so these things that I can think through help me decide what's best for the kid. And if I'm making a decision based on what's best for that kid, that's going to be supported. And I can think through these things quickly. So when we look at these people and think about their impact on me as a leader, it brings me to talking to you about the story of a mock ARD. So I was at my campus that I was at, had the longest tenure at, and we were holding ARD meetings, but we weren't really connecting with parents well. So I decided that what I needed to do as a leader is model what I was asking them to do. But I was hitting little pieces of the ARD. I was saying, hey, when you describe what they're doing, start with strengths. Then I would talk about when you say they're reading on a level G, don't say that. Say this is a 2nd grade level and they're in 4th grade. Like, give the parents some context, because if you say, oh, it's just a little behind, they might not understand. So in order to do that and model the expectation piece, this call to action for me was to create a mock ARD. So we made a fake student, an entire profile in our online system for managing FIEs and ARDs. I had a diag who was great and put all those things together. We brought in 2 of our teachers to the table to have the mock ARD with all of the appropriate required people there. We had the whole committee to make sure that we were legally sound in our practice. And then we had our other teachers in special education sitting kind of in the gallery to be able to like take notes or make comments or kind of highlight on some documents what are the important parts to point out to parents to make sure that they're really understanding what's going on. And in this ARD, I had a parent come in. And so I had this special education parent for our mock ARD sit at the table. And when the teachers started describing the current levels of performance, this person would say, stop right there. That doesn't feel good. Like the way you said that hurts my heart. Or I need you to say that again because you use teacher jargon and I don't understand what OT and PT are. Like, can you explain that to me? Break it down. And so having that parent come in and hold them accountable in that moment, it like shocked the system of the teachers enough that when you kind of dysregulate your own patterns, it's a better, deeper learning experience. And in this particular situation, I was able to bring in a parent who had special education understanding from the parent perspective and had had a student sit through these ARD meetings, granted many years ago, because my own brother was served in special education services. So I shared my mom with you to say that I brought her to the table. And it's those things that you do to make things personal that people really remember and they make a lasting impact. And so I know that the educators that sat at that table that day, they viewed ARDS in a different way when you were actually able to have a parent sit in who would tell you the emotional response they're feeling. Because if you've never sat on that side of the table, you may not really get it. And how many of our teachers don't have kids? They don't, they haven't had to mourn some of these losses of ideals where like my kid may not be an astronaut, my kid may not read on grade level, my kid may not be able to do certain things. So my mock ARD experience and my call to action is to find a way to engage parents. So these two visual images for me were your team is sitting at one end of the table, they're kind of holding the meeting, the parents at the other end. It's nice and shiny, everything's happening, but what's going on with my kid? We don't want to do that. We want to engage our parents and we want them to be at the table with us. So maybe not with their kid in their lap. Sometimes the kids are sitting on the floor coloring because they always have like the little sibling or something. But find ways to allow parents to come in and be authentically themselves, but feel valued and that they're part of the team for the decision making for their students. Obviously, we include the student as we get up in more of those higher grade levels and transitions and plannings and those things. But especially early on, making the parent like this shows you like flipping things around, making sure the parents are seeing the data, that you're not just talking about it at them, but you're really going over it with them. So that is my passion, is really calling everybody together, and where when you're working as an administrator and an educator in partnership, you can also bring the parent into that partnership and engage them as well.
So, similar to Melissa, I challenged myself to come up with words that I felt identified me as a special educator and even an educator in general. And I'm sure y'all have words that you could probably write down for yourself too that make it valuable. But these are things that I could stand behind as a special educator and what I thought was truly my role and helping guide what was best for all children involved. And you can read through the words. I can give you definitions, but I think you can kind of understand it with having a similar background in special education. So, educator empowerment has been a big thing for me, especially having an administrator that has a special education background. It has been different. It was a different journey for me from the beginning of my educational career to the time that I ended up with somebody. So I like to say I've always pushed myself for what's best for my students, but everything shifted when I had this administrator who truly understood the special education population. That support validated my efforts and gave me the confidence to push harder and advocate boldly. So I no longer felt like I was kind of fighting alone. There were many moments that I would go into Melissa's office and say, hey, can we kind of shut the door and talk through this? Because I'm not really understanding how we're coming to this conclusion for this kid, or um, I'm looking at these accommodations, but the gen ed teachers are thinking these. And we would just kind of talk through things to make sure that we were on the right path. And she always felt that need to sit and listen and then validate what we were saying. And she would sometimes empower me even stronger of like, hey, well, why don't we take it this track? Let's grow it a little bit further. That is my, I will say though, that is my challenge to you as a leader, is to find those moments when you can collaborate and help empower talking through those things. There have been a lot of times in her office that we've done that. So from me as an educator and from my heart, I've been able to wear 4 different hats as an educator. And I've gotten to see every side and the value of having that administrative team and having a collaborative team, how you can push the direction of a special education kid to their fullest potential. I mean, I'm a true advocate, like Melissa even said earlier, to get kids as much included as possible in the general education setting. They don't need to necessarily, just because they have a certain label, that they're going to be stagnant in a self-contained environment. Maybe they don't fit every subject in a gen ed setting, but they do have strengths that we can push towards. So as a sped teacher, I always knew that it was kind of frustrating tracking down the paperwork and stuff like that. And then I got to see the different side of it when I became a gen ed teacher. And the lady that you saw earlier, her name was Robin. And I got a true partnership because I didn't necessarily know all of the information that I was teaching, but she came in and she took me under her wing and kind of helped guide me to make sure I was teaching the lesson properly from her experience. And then I got to understand why I was tracking down general ed teachers and frustrated, because they have so much on their plate too. So being able to have the different perspectives helped, because Robin would have to sit with me after school and say, hey, we're going to sit down and we're going to go through this paperwork together. And let's see how we're going to do what's best for the kid. Do we agree with these accommodations and stuff like that? And then moving into my last role, I got to be a co-teacher, which was phenomenal because you have that partnership from the beginning. You are in that environment 100% all the time, guiding which direction you want the kids to grow, and you're communicating constantly about, hey, what do you think about this idea? This didn't really work, but I have this perspective of what might work. And then I also, you can see in one of the pictures, I got to manage an after school program. And that's when I first met Melissa, because it was the only job opened at our campus at the time. And it was where I kind of got to understand a little bit of the leadership role. So prior to being there, it was an after school grant funded program. And they did include our special needs population, but it was limited because they didn't necessarily have the support to help guide the teachers that were working with the students for the enrichment and homework. So when I came on, Melissa and I got to talking and we got to collaborate, both coming from a special education background, about how can we make this more accessible to more students than what we had. Obviously, there was still limitations because you have to have certain criteria to work with students with special needs, but some of them that we could offer it to, we were able to find educators on our campus who maybe had a special education background, could work with modifying whatever enrichment activity they had, and things like that. So from those experiences, they proved that early on, a table truly, everybody at the table truly understands our SPED students and how change really happens. Each role showed me something different, but they all pointed to the same truth. When the whole team, including administrators, understand our needs of our special education students, everything gets stronger. Collaboration is not just dividing tasks, it's sharing perspectives so we can make a guided decision for our kids. And I feel like that is something that is valuable when we're making those decisions. And if an administrator truly knows the SPED kids more than just what they see in the computer, then they can help collaborate and guide those decisions to make their programs and students grow even further.
So I'll just say part of what I think Kim really brings to the table is her willingness and ability to invest in all of those different perspectives. Like she said, structured, self-contained classroom, after school program coordinator, general education, inclusive practices, and in truly working as a team. She grew me in making sure I stayed connected and understanding teacher roles. I tried to give them the ability to have the support to advocate more and more strongly and get the things that we needed for our students. And so this whole presentation is really about those collaboration pieces and those partnerships. but in being willing to take on all of those roles and not lose yourself to your current lens and your current perspective. I talked about bringing in my mom. I was a sister to a student who received special education services. I've been a special education teacher, 1 year a general education teacher, and I've supported various special education programs. And when you bring those things together with such great complementing things, as we had a consistent special education teacher on our campus, so she knew where we had been, where we were, and where we wanted to go, back to that impact piece. Then also have somebody who's coming in from the outside with varying perspectives. When you bring everybody to the table, it's just a deeper and richer experience to grow us as educators and also grow our students. So with that in mind, we want to make sure that we've kept our promises to you and done these things. So we talked about student tracking tools and shared with you some of those pieces in visuals here, and we'll get to a link to them in just a second. And we talked about the strategic thinking guidance, using those 3 questions at the end of your ARDS or IEP meetings, using 4 guides or however many guides that you want to visualize in your mind of who are you answering to when you're trying to make these decisions and support kids in the right ways. And then these call to action pieces. Engage the whole teams, use your multiple and different and varied perspectives. So with all of that said, we just get to say thank you for joining us, and we hope that something from this presentation resounds within you and motivates you to either use it or share it in some way in your current role. Serving our special education students is such a blessing, but it's also often tricky with unique and special needs. And it's great to get to be part of something and get to learn more about a company that helps meet the needs of those students when they're, unique, or there's situations where the demand is high and the supply is low, and which is often the case across many states, but it is certainly here in ours. So if you scan that QR code, it should take you to a folder. And within that folder, you'll find a couple of resources there, our presentation information, the student tracker, and we'll make sure that you have the tools and things that we presented to you tonight to be able to take and make your own in some version. And again, I just want to say thank you, Kim. Thanks for this opportunity. Our picture is at Starbucks together. We got to enjoy a coffee. And so in our friendship as well, getting to share information with you is such a blessing to us. So thank you to Point Quest and everyone this evening.